the Aging Hub a weekly age-friendly meeting online, obviously. That's still happening today, 20 to 30 people still joining that call weekly. And in those very first few weeks, it helped escalate a number of issues quickly through decision-making structures to try and address those. And Beth and colleagues at Greater Sport and GM Moving were, very early on understanding that getting messages out there about how people could stay active at home were really important. So I think within a matter of weeks, there was signposting and a web page. So just example of that kind of rapid escalation. That a lot of that work and all the messages involved into the Keeping Well at Home booklet, which 67,000 copies of that were distributed in Greater Manchester. There's now a WHO case study of that, and we're working on a Keep Well This Winter campaign. And messages, again, of physical functioning as well as mental well-being and social connection, really key in that work, and a really kind of cross-sector collaboration on that. Other examples include creative care kits delivered to 16,000 older people, a valuable Not Vulnerable campaign, really motivated by the Greater Manchester Older People's Network and their concern about how older people are represented as purely vulnerable, amongst other things in the early kind of days of the weeks of the pandemic. We've also been doing a range of research and analysis around what the impact of COVID-19 is, talk a little bit about that later, and continue to speak to international and European networks to share practice and learn from them. At the same time as continuing to focus on some of the strategic objectives. So I think the one kind of I'd highlight there is the work around employment support for over 50s. So a lot of work going on still in Greater Manchester around that, and an incredibly important time to be thinking about how to support over 50s around employment. And thinking about recovery and what comes next. And we really welcomed when the Mayor joined a webinar that Centre for Ageing Better organised in June to think about what recovery would look like for the population, the older population. And that recovery definitely includes thinking around physical activity. It sits for the Ageing Hub within the Ageing Well strategic objective, which is around how do we connect people doing the things that they love so they can have social connection and healthier lives. It's a range of activity already underway, and I know Beth's going to speak a bit more to this at the end of today, and just to reiterate that focusing on physical activity is a key part of our partnership between the Centre for Ageing Better and GMCA in the future. And we are looking at what works, how we share that evidence base, scale it up and create system change. And really key to that will be how we connect it into Ageing in Place programme, to working with neighbourhoods. A little bit, too quick, in brief about the Centre for Ageing Better, just for those of you who are less familiar with our work. So we are a national charity funded by a community lottery fund endowment. We're a part of the What Works network, and we work across 4 priority areas: employment, housing, health and communities. And we're particularly focused on thinking about the 50 to 70 age cohort, understanding what can we do in these years that will prepare us all for a better later life. It's the UK, as hopefully everyone here knows, is undergoing a massive age shift, but for many people there is a risk of missing out on enjoying those later years. So that really is our focus. And we work with 3 strategic partners. So as well as Greater Manchester, we work with Leeds and with Lincolnshire to test what works locally and to learn from what is happening locally, so we can scale that up and share those messages nationally. In healthy ageing, our goal is for people to have 5 more years free of preventable disability and to reduce the gap between the richest and the poorest people in disability-free life expectancy. And physical inactivity is a key part of that work. Our current focus on routes, in terms of routes to change, is by working with the fitness and leisure sector. So we have a partnership with UK Active and a research project currently to determine what further work we might do, and to think about active travel. And that's an area where Beth and I have been working with others, and there are particular opportunities potentially at the moment to build on. I just thought it would be helpful to share in brief a few messages around what we are seeing around impact of COVID-19. I think it's still early days in terms of understanding fully the impact, but I think we're all clear that the risk of developing severe COVID-19 increases as we get older, and it's had a massive impact on the older population. And in our view, what we've seen is a highlight in the lack of action on health inequalities underlying an exacerbation of those. Our Ipsos Murray polling has demonstrated that 1 in 5 people have seen their physical health deteriorate. This is national data, but we have similar data for GM, particularly in poorer income households, and that is further exacerbated if you already have deteriorating mental health, existing poor health conditions, your home is not fit for purpose, you're pessimistic about your finances or out of work. So that real interconnection of those issues. I think we will be learning more in coming months about the impact of deferred medical appointments and delayed treatment. And these are certainly some of the statistics we've gathered around cancellations, what the impact of that is. And I guess really just to finish on that is that to reiterate the point that we feel that COVID-19 has exacerbated a lot of what we already knew around physical inactivity and aging, and how we need to address healthy aging. So physical activity continues to be one of our priorities. We include in that strength and balance. We think there are opportunities around active travel to support walking and cycling. That needs to happen in conjunction with designing places for walkability, and also around working with the fitness and active leisure sector. So I'm going to stop there and attempt to stop sharing my screen now. And as I said, any questions, happy to take in the chat.
Brilliant, thanks Nicola, that was perfect and kept to time, so well done. Again, as initially mentioned, any questions, please do direct them in the chat and Nicola will pick those up. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to quickly move on to Tom Burton, who's our next speaker from Sport England, who was a wonderful relationship manager and really supported us in terms of the delivery of our programme. So over to you, Tom.
What an introduction, Beth. Thank you very much. I know. People are going to be cynical about that, but no, I very much appreciate that. Thank you. Right, I'm just going to go and try and share my screen as well. Hopefully it works in the same way. Beth, can you give me the nod that that's come through? Brilliant. Thank you very much. So, yeah, a bit of a challenge to me, but I will try and stick to time. So, as Beth said, my name's Tom Burton. I work in the health and inactivity team at Sport England. I oversee a range of our investments and partnerships with organisations that really look to work with us to tackle inactivity. And I guess within Sport England and across the organisation, we hold a lot of the relationships with health organisations and colleagues. So we've done a lot of work and continue to do a lot of work with PHE, even through some quite challenging times for them at the moment. But the Royal College of GPs, National Centres, Sport and Exercise Medicine, and some of the national health charities as well. Really started to build up some momentum around that work, which we're going to take into our new strategy, which I'll talk about shortly. So what I'm going to do for the next few minutes really is to talk about, I'll take you through a few slides. They're a little bit graph heavy, and apologies in advance for that, but I think it paints a really, really stark picture around some of the challenges and opportunities around being active into older adulthood, not least the impact that the pandemic's had. Then we'll talk a bit about active aging more specifically, and then I'll just touch on our strategy at the end. So just to start then, this is for those of you, hoping everyone's aware of our Active Lives survey. It's our twice a year survey that we take around activity levels, national surveillance program. This is our latest data set that covers the period May 19 to May 20. So this was only published last month. And what this page really shows is, if you look at the age spectrum of activity levels, and this is the proportion of different age ranges that are active, that is, those achieving at least 150 minutes of moderate intensity activity a week, or achieving 75 minutes of vigorous intensity activity. And it also talks through the different years. So this is direct comparator to previous data sets. And if I move your eyes along to the bottom two right-hand graphs, the 55 to 74 and then the 75 plus age group, I think what it started to paint is, certainly up until the pandemic, a fairly really positive picture of activity levels. So we saw certainly in the 55 to 74 age range, there was some consistency in terms of the proportion of this age range that were achieving those recommended guidelines. But really importantly, we were seeing a really positive and statistically significant shift amongst the 75 plus age group. So it was looking rosy up until March, and it was still a huge amount of work to do, but testament to a lot of the focus and targeted work that was going on across the country to really engage and support this audience. So it was starting to look really positive. Moving us on, and if we really actually unpick that a little bit, the mid-March to mid-May time span, when we look at active lives, actually shows the impact that the pandemic has had. And this is building on Nicola's points really in the last presentation. So what this shows, as a direct comparator to this time last year, for the 55 to 74 age range, we've seen an over 7% drop in of this audience that were self-reporting themselves as active compared to 2019. And with the 75 plus audience, a 6.6% drop. In real terms, that's approaching 300,000 older adults that of that 75 plus that were no longer active, and therefore not getting the benefits that very regular active lifestyle brings. So really started to paint a stark picture in terms of that sudden shift when the pandemic hit on that the motivation, capability, opportunities linked to being active. Delving even deeper, still looking at the 55 plus age range, but this time looking at those individuals that self-report to have a disability or long-term health condition as well. Again, this is the same point. This is looking at mid-March to mid-May, and this is a comparator against those individuals that say they do not have a disability or long-term health condition. But what it really shows is, if you look at the 2 years, the left-hand graph there, you see a 10% drop on the proportion being active for those that say they have a disability or long-term health condition. So not only, actually this is exacerbated if you have a different physical or mental health condition alongside, going into older adulthood. The impact it has on anxiety becoming active was really significant. And of course, this was seen across both age ranges as well, but really starts to paint a really stark story. When you have that intersectionality, it's quite challenging. Another complicated looking graph that I'll try and simplify for you, but effectively what this shows is, this was the ComRes data. So coming away from the active lives, this was the weekly data set activity survey, that we Sport England commissioned throughout the pandemic, starting in March all the way through to the end of September and into October. And what those two lines essentially show is, the red line is the proportion at each wave, each week, if you like, of those individuals that say they've done no activity over the last 5 days. So that's what the red line shows. What the green line shows is the proportion that said that they do at least 30 minutes over the last, with a resilient habit of being active, and those that are relatively inactive. And what this really then starts to break down is that towards the end of the waves, we saw that actually the proportion that were inactive, achieving activity on multiple days, is difficult. It's difficult to any causality as to why that is, but we know there's a sector and as a system, we've really started to focus lots of resource and target the work that we do, particularly into this age category, into this audience. And that is there's a strong correlation. There's a lot of the work that was going on, and then we saw the changes in activity levels. But it started again to look like we were able to start to support this audience in a better way throughout a very challenging time. And my final graph, which I think Nicola touched on in hers, was the importance, when we talk about active and inactive, we talk about cardiorespiratory type fitness, generally speaking. We talk about moderate levels and vigorous levels of activity in terms of intensity. What we don't talk about so much is the strength-based areas, which are really, really important, as we know through the CMO guidelines for this particular audience. So within the ComRes survey, a question we added into the final wave was that thinking about when you do everyday activities that work your muscles, we gave examples like shopping, carrying shopping, climbing the stairs, or gardening. Do you think your general strength has changed during the outbreak? Now, the two graphs you've got there is those that have said that their strength declined, and then those whose strength improved. If you look at the declined graph, really significantly, if you look at that big purple column there, those with a long-term health condition, long-term conditional disability, significantly declined, levels that have declined really around strength. And also in that 55 plus age group as well. And we did see some quite stark inequalities linked to lower socioeconomic groups. Those that said that their strength did actually decline when you look at different socioeconomic groups as well. So again, paints quite a stark picture. Moving on then, I guess that is the, and we conducted this exercise. Obviously there wasn't the pandemic back in 2016 when we embarked on the active aging program, but there were still some big inequalities in terms of activity levels when it comes to older adults. So we embarked on this this program with an £11 million investment nationally. It was an open fund. It was the first open fund that we had as part of the current Sport England strategy, which is coming to an end shortly. All of the programs are running throughout from any time from 2016-17 right through to 2022. So we haven't got the full learnings yet from a number of those programs because a lot of them were slightly longer term. But there's 23 of those programs and partnerships that we have, and it's all around finding activities that are relevant, practical and enjoyable for older adults. There's a real focus on tackling inactivity and understanding the building blocks to support those communities and individuals, to support them out of inactivity, so crossing that 30-minute a week threshold. So we're not expecting anyone to take this huge leap suddenly up to 150 minutes a week, although we have seen some approaches do that. But generally actually sustaining that level of behaviour change is very difficult, and it's those incremental building blocks that have worked really well. We're also looking at it through different lenses, and I'll come on to this shortly. So it could be an audience-specific lens. So some people, organisations focusing on a 55 to 64 or a 75 plus specifically, or just older adults with a long-term condition. So a range. It could be seen through the lens of an organisation change and how they support this audience, through the lens of a place, or through the lens of approaches to support and change a system. And I think it's fair to say that through this GM project, I think it's all of those things together, which is really, really positive. Range of places and spaces that the activities and support has taken place in at the bottom of that slide as well. Here are some of the, apart from greater sport and obviously the GM partnership that comes with that, there is a range of other partners that are part of the active aging program, and here are just a few of those. And I manage a relationship with a few of these, but it really is everything, real huge range there. We had 750 applicants for the active aging program, and we're funded 23. So it gives you a sense of the scale of the demand for this, but actually through those 23, we're getting a huge amount of learning, which we're looking to pull together more succinctly and share with wider system partners. I guess this workshop is a good example of doing that at a place level. Just a couple more slides for me. To date, or up until the end of November 2019, over 26,000 inactive older adults have been supported through the programme. Around about 10,000 have sustained that behaviour change at 3 and 6 months. But this is not the latest or a final data set by any means in terms of the evaluation, and a lot of those programs are obviously still running, but that's to give you an indication of where we were towards the end of last year. We've got a breakdown there of the different age cohorts from 55 plus onwards. Generally speaking, tends to be the 55 to 84, but you can see that at least a fifth of the programs, or the fifth of participants, have been in that 85 plus age group. We've got a gender split, and we know that 23% of the participants have been from the 20% most deprived communities in terms of who they've engaged, those programs have engaged to date. And we've got some employment-based stats as well down the bottom. So what we're seeing and finding is the importance of changing how we talk and provide the opportunities for this audience, that many people just need the right opportunity. But actually talking to people is one of the best things we can do. And it sounds so simple, but actually understanding those needs and understanding if the assets you have in the community can support that. That moving more is improving functional and supporting them to feel capable. So it's not just about putting on the right activity, is do they need a different type of support as well to improve their motivation, to support their feelings of capability as well. Moving more is around, the evaluations have told us it's improving physical function, mental well-being, it's restoring independence, it's building friendships, and really tackling loneliness, a lot of those entrenched societal issues. And I think almost like a takeaway point from us, the course that Aging takes is not predetermined. So it's about the way that we live our lives and the experiences we have, and the portfolio right across the board is really starting to demonstrate and challenge some of those existing societal norms and the way that this audience, people talk about this audience. And I think all of the work that Nicola's talked about through the Aging Hub and more widely, what we'd like to do is actually learn from the wider portfolio and feed into that and actually show the case that this is what we're learning right across the board. So what next from a Sport England perspective around this particular group? Beth, I'm hoping okay for the next 30 seconds. So we've got a new Sport England strategy, thank you, that is going to be published from January next year. A huge amount of work's gone into co-designing and co-producing that strategy over the last 12 months or so. And I'm sure many of you would have fed into that, and there's still opportunity to do so. But we're looking at a 10-year transformational strategy that's built on previously it's mirrored sort of political cycles. It's been such a shorter term 4 or 5 year tenure, and of course that gives us some real opportunity to build momentum and actually have some longer term visions and aspirations to really build towards. But getting there, if we've learned anything over the last 6 or 7 months, can be a bit of a windy affair and not necessarily quite as straight as we'd like it to be. And therefore we need it to be very agile and flexible and adaptable to what's thrown up in society and across the landscape that we all operate in. But there's a much more of a focus on tackling inequalities, and a big part of that is around age, of course. And we know that there are, and what we've heard so far from partners, there are 5 big issues that need to be addressed that will be have paramount importance in the strategy. That's about stronger communities and being more place focused and more joined up systemically. So it's less top-down approaches and more we want to be part of those conversations to understand the role that we can play to support that, where the value added is. I should say the terminology is still being finalised here, but recover and reinvent, which is thinking with a COVID lens, but actually making sure that we have a really vibrant, sustainable network of organisations that provide and support people to be active, that we want positive experiences to continue for children and young people. The environments that we all live and work in need to really support physical activity to be the norm. And an active life or a healthy life, something I'm very involved in, is around looking at all of the health inequalities that are there and the role that Sport England can play. The narrative around that to ensure that we better connect physical activity with the health sector and the health system. So there's a consultation that's running throughout November. I'll feed in any thoughts around this area. There's a bit more detail on the website, but first of all, we can move on. Thanks, Beth.
Perfect, thanks, Tom. I'm just going to quickly move on to our next speaker, just because I'm a bit conscious of time and the delayed start. So I'm going to pass over to David French, who is our lead for the evaluation, who's going to be supported by Amy and take us through the programme findings. I'm going to share my screen for David, so just let me know when you want me to move on. And I will just... Can everyone see that okay?
Great. Okay, thank you, Beth. Yeah, so myself and Amy Davis are going to present the evaluation of the Active Ageing programme in Greater Manchester, just to flag up that there was quite a team of us that did this evaluation. Okay. Right, so as Tom's clearly set out earlier on, older people are the age group that are least likely to be active, in the population, and the majority of older adults don't engage with physical activity provision that's been put out by leisure services and local authorities. So this project really was about trying to try these new ways of working, slightly different ways of doing things, to see to what extent these new ways of working engage more people, and what do people think about these new ways of working. There's 5 different new ways of working listed there. The key thing which they all share really is basically involving older adults more as partners in the provision, partnership working between leisure services, local authorities and charities of one sort or another, as well as ageing organisations. Basically trying to engage older people in the development and delivery of these physical activity provision to a greater extent than has gone on before. Okay. Right, so the evaluation itself. So we're basically trying to find out what happened with regard to the 2-year funding for the Active Ageing programme. There were 5 different objectives. I'm going to talk about the top 3, the blue ones, which is basically putting some numbers on what happened in Greater Manchester. And then later on, Amy will talk about the red objectives, which is more about how did people experience this programme, both the people involved in delivering it and the people who were receiving the programme. Okay, right, so the first thing I want to talk about then is what provision was put on, and that's not an easy thing to do because the local authorities that were involved in this programme, there were 8 local authorities that were given funding as part of this programme. They described 88 different activities that they put on. I'm sure Beth will say something about this at the end, but we've got a very detailed description of what the activities were, which will be put on the Greater Sport website at the end. I think the key things I want to convey is there was lots of things being put on, lots of activities being put on. They were quite diverse, and they were involved these new ways of working in lots of different ways. So just to give you some examples, you'll get more detailed examples from the people in Stockport and Manchester later on. The sorts of things people did were things like walking cricket, walking rugby, walking netball, so kind of more traditional kind of sport provision, but with an emphasis on ageing. Things like walking history groups, walking litter picking groups, which was again an extension of the more traditional sort of walking activities. Chair-based exercise, which has been quite a traditional thing, but taking that out into the community more, so taking it out into libraries, pubs and care homes, and things like volunteer gardening, where the activities were run by the volunteers themselves. So they were the kinds of things that were done. Now, in terms of the actual numbers of this, the numbers I think are impressive. So nearly 15,000 people were engaged in the programme in various different ways. And when I say engaged, I mean that the people were asked for their opinions, or they were involved in developing the programmes, or they participated in the programmes. So 15,000 people in a 2-year programme, I think, is pretty good goings, given a lot of the Metropolitan Borough Council started from a fairly cold level with regard to this kind of new way of working. So 2,666 people enrolled in the activities that were offered as part of this programme. So that's 18% of the total people who are engaged in any way. And then in terms of the numbers I'm going to report from now on, 41% of the people who enrolled in the Greater Manchester Active Ageing programme provided information on their demographic characteristics and physical activity across the 8 councils. So let's have a look at that baseline characteristics. Okay, so the first thing to say about the baseline demographic characteristics is that, as you would hope, the majority of people were older adults. So as you can see, the 3 sort of middle bars there were people between 50 and 60, 60 and 70, and 70 and 80. So they were the vast majority of the people who participated in these activities. There was one person who was over 100, which is quite impressive. But basically, in terms of the target population, the activities reached the target population. Okay, Tom earlier on was talking about deprivation, and this is in terms of this histogram is showing the proportion of people within each of the deprivation groups. So each of these bars shows, let's start that again. If you look at the left, that is the more deprived bits of Greater Manchester, and on the right is the less deprived bits of Greater Manchester. If there was equal reaching people across deprived groups, you get a fairly flat line there. But as you can see, the two highest bars are the two on the left-hand side, which is the most deprived bits of Greater Manchester, and the lowest bar is the one on the right-hand side, which is the least deprived bits of Greater Manchester. So I think this is quite a success in terms of reaching the most deprived people in Greater Manchester, the most deprived older people in Greater Manchester, because most of these physical activity programs tend to reach the more kind of middle class groups of people and not the more deprived people, whereas you can see that this program has been very successful in reaching the most deprived people who tend not to engage in these sort of physical activity programs. This next slide is not quite so positive. The overwhelming majority of people, 87% of people who reported their ethnicity self-described themselves as white, 7% of people didn't want to say what ethnic group they fell into, and 6% of people described themselves as belonging to one or more ethnic minority groups. So the active aging program basically, even though it's successful at engaging more deprived people, it was basically depriving more deprived white people by and large. There were variations across the metropolitan borough councils. Some were more successful at doing this than others, but the majority of the people that were engaged were white. Okay, so this is quite a key one. So this is the number of people who were at various levels of physical activity using Sport England's Short Active Lives survey. So the people in the left-hand side in the purple bar, they were people who described doing less than 30 minutes of activity a week that was sufficient to increase their breathing rate. The middle bar is people who described themselves as engaging between 30 minutes and 150 minutes per week of physical activity sufficient to increase their breathing rate. And the people on the right-hand side, the green bar, they're people who described doing physical activity sufficient to increase their breathing rate for at least 150 minutes per week. So the key thing which I want you to take away from this is that the majority of people who engaged in this program, 59% of people who reported their physical activity levels, were not engaging in this moderate level of physical activity which the government recommendations recommend. So again, to the extent that one wants to engage people who are not very physically active, the program's been very successful at doing that because the majority of people who were engaged were not very physically active. Okay, and this is the change in physical activity from baseline to 3 months. So one of the challenges of this evaluation was that obviously some people who completed questionnaires at baseline didn't complete questionnaires at 3 months. We've got the physical activity reported at baseline in the three graphs to the three bars to the left, and then physical activity levels reported at 3 months in the bars to the right. So the key thing I'd like to draw your attention to is that the majority of people at baseline reported themselves as being engaging in less than 30 minutes of physical activity sufficient to raise their breath a week. So we've got, sorry, I'll start that again. The majority of people reported themselves as being inactive, doing less than 30 minutes of physical activity a week. And on the right-hand side at 3 months, you can see that very few of those people, there were very few people reporting doing less than 30 minutes. There was comparatively more people doing between 30 and 150 or over minutes per week. Now, a challenge of doing these kinds of evaluations is then it could be that the people in the purple bar on the left-hand side just dropped out of the programme, and the people who completed the questionnaires at 3 months were the people who were already quite active. But if we look at the next slide, we can see that that's not the case, because these were the people that completed the questionnaires at both time points. So we can directly compare the questionnaire responses at baseline compared to the same people completing questionnaires at 3 months. And I think it shows quite clearly that the majority of people at baseline who were not very active, at 3 months, there were very few people of those. They've moved into the orange and green bars of being much more active than when they started. So I think that's quite a striking result. I think that's quite an impressive result. But of the people who engaged with the physical activity programme, the majority of them did increase their physical activity in quite a substantial way, which is not common in lots of these kinds of interventions, having a big increase in physical activity of that size. And similarly, another failing of previous programs is that people often increase their physical activity and then they sort of drift back to what they were doing at baseline. But you can see again in the comparing the matched people at baseline in 6 months, the people who at the start were very inactive, they again have maintained their physical activity in terms of doing between 30 and 150 minutes or 150 minutes or more at 6 months. So not only did people increase their physical activity, the people who engaged in this program, but also that physical activity was maintained for 6 months, which again is quite not common in lots of previous physical activity programs. Okay, there were also in the Sport England questionnaire, there were measures of well-being. I think the key thing I want to say here is there was a slight increase, which was statistically reliable in several sort of secondary measures. So people who engaged in the program reported greater life satisfaction, greater happiness, and engaging in more worthwhile worthwhile activities. The effects weren't big, but they were in the right direction. The people who engaged in these activities reported greater well-being at 3 months. That effect was not maintained at 6 months, but still, it's useful to know that, I think. Okay, right. So basically, to summarise the numbers, these are the key take-home points in terms of the numbers. There were a large number of people who engaged in a highly diverse set of activities across the 8 metropolitan boroughs who participated. There were 14,500 people who engaged with these activities, and 2,666 people actually enrolled in participating in these activities. I think one of the big successes of this programme is that the people who delivered these services managed to engage people from deprived neighbourhoods, and also they managed to engage fairly inactive people. As with a lot of other programmes, they were not quite successful at engaging men as they were at women, so only 29% of the participants were men, and the majority of people who engaged would describe themselves as being white. The follow-up data showed that there were quite big increases in physical activity, which were maintained to at least 6 months in those people who engaged in the activities. So I think that's all I want to say about the numbers, and Amy will now give you some qualitative details to put some more flesh on the bones of these numbers.
Thank you, David. Could we go on to the next slide? Thanks. Yeah, so I'm going to be discussing the qualitative research that was carried out as part of the Greater Manchester Activation evaluation. So these qualitative findings helped explain why the programme was effective, as well as highlighting some of the challenges in development and implementation. So there were a range of perspectives that were represented over 2 studies. So I'm going to discuss study 1 first. So this study was conducted in the first year of the programme to explore the views of programme leads and decision makers and how they found setting up the programme, basically. So the key aims of this study was to understand key decision makers, how they found the process of developing the Greater Manchester Activation programme, as well as understanding any difficulties in developing their new services, and also to understand what has been helpful to people during the development process. So I'll just quickly go over the methods for the first study. So 20 participants were interviewed, and these were individuals who were involved in the development of the Great Manchester Active Aging Programme. So we interviewed 13 Metropolitan Borough Council leads. So these are the people who are involved in developing active aging projects within their borough and securing an investment from Greater Sport. And we interviewed 7 individuals from stakeholder organisations, and these were people who were involved at a GM-wide level. So those involved in the initial bid for the £1 million investment, and those involved in choosing these successful MBC applicants. So we conducted semi-structured interviews, and these topics included volunteer peer mentors, co-design and co-production, and sustainability of the projects. So I'm just going to go through the 3 main themes from this study. So there was a lot of discussion around people's experiences of these new ways of working. So generally, co-design approaches were viewed really positively, and they were seen as really valuable. So older adults were seen as providing valuable contributions in terms of ideas, and in some cases they took ownership of the project, so specifically co-design with older adults. And there was discussions around place-based approaches as well, and this was generally viewed as a way to embed the programme within the community. So participants discussed their considerations of utilising community resources that were not traditionally associated with physical activity. So we saw sessions being set up in community venues, such as the pub, rather than in the gym. But through these new ways of working, older adults were seen as assets to the programme, and they were key to the success of these new ways of working. As well as this, collaboration with other partners was really, really important, or seen as really important. So partners from the ageing world, working with organisations from the physical activity world, sharing knowledge, experience and resources. The next slide, please. So the second theme were discussions around the understanding of acceptability of physical activity programmes to older adults. So what really came across here was how important the social element of the programme was, how this was seen for older adults. So one participant said, you know, we're selling activity, but people are buying friendship. As well as the social element, the qualities of the staff delivering was seen as really important. So staff who understood the needs of older adults also understood the importance of that social element, and staff who were approachable and friendly. Accessibility was also a key consideration in a number of ways. So accessibility in terms of transport, so how far away the sessions were, was walking required, confidence around using public transport, social support to attend sessions, as well as accessibility relating to marketing and promotional materials. So how easily accessible were these? And finally, Greater Manchester Active Aging Programme was seen as an opportunity to change the way older adults felt and thought about physical activity. So really challenging those negative perceptions that they might have had about relating to physical activity. Next slide, please. And then finally, there was a lot of discussion around resources and sustainability and how that impacted programme development and implementation. So the Active Aging Programme was fixed term for 2 years. And there seemed to be this view that there was an impact of staff turnover and staff capacity on projects. So, and when you consider the time it takes to get new staff in and to get them up to speed with the programme, it's quite understandable. So yeah, tight timescales really led to challenges in co-design and other relationship building activities. Sustainability concerns were also discussed. So what will happen when the funding runs out? And some areas actually turned to the older adults for ideas around sustainability. So feedback from older adults to develop acceptable solutions. For example, was it acceptable to attach a small cost to a session? Upskilling older adults themselves to deliver the sessions rather than externally commissioning someone to put on physical activity. So that were the main 3 themes from the first study. If you could go on to the next slide. So yeah, you just heard about how people experienced developing and setting up the programme, but this study, study number 2, focused on how people found implementing the programme and putting it into practice. So this study is different from study 1 as it explored the views of older adults who were taking part in the sessions, as well as those working on the ground to deliver and coordinate the sessions. So the key aim of this study was to understand the experiences of older adults and service providers, GM Active Aging Activities, and to understand the barriers and facilitators to implementing and participating in physical activity opportunities. Next slide, please. So the methods for this study, we conducted 4 focus groups across 4 sites in GM with older adults who were participating in the session, and this involved 22 participants. And we also interviewed 12 participants at one site. We also interviewed people who were delivering the activities. So 13 participants were interviewed. So this involved 3 volunteers who were involved in the delivery of the programme, 4 instructors who led on the sessions, as well as 6 Activithes coordinators. And next slide, please. So there was a lot of discussion around how do we attract older adults to the activities, or how did older adults, what do they find attractive about these sort of sessions? So a key thing that came up was accessing information about the activities. So individuals need to be able to access the info about the activities. So there was discussions around how older adults could make valuable suggestions about developing marketing materials, and suggestions around where the information could be placed to gain attention. We also learned that we shouldn't assume that older adults would not access information via social media. So some did feel reluctant to use it, but others thought it was quite useful. And others mentioned how family members and friends use social media, and they passed on the information about activities this way. So one of the quotes here from a focus group: even if you've got somebody who isn't great with their phone, if one of their friends is good with their phone, then that information is still getting out to them. Another thing that came up was the consideration of the language used relating to the programme. So the general idea here was that traditional language could be seen as off-putting. So one of the quotes from the focus group said, "There's a big colour brochure saying that saying active aging, and maybe that's the wrong word. Maybe we don't use the word active." And also support was important for those who lacked the confidence to attend. So there was a sense that there was a need to support people in terms of social support, so in terms of family members encouraging them to attend, as well as peer support to get them involved. So one of the quotes here from a focus group: "I didn't have the courage to come on my own, so she came with me." Next slide, please. So there was a lot of discussion around activity design. So a key factor in determining whether or not people would attend sessions, it seems to be that ensuring the activity itself would fit the needs of the individual. So one thing that came up often was the idea of co-design and co-production, and how it was needed to ensure that the sessions met the needs of older adults. So one of the quotes from a coordinator, like a co-design approach with participants and also the local residents to find out what they want. And I think that's encouraged local people to come along and take part. And we've seen a number of people from day one attend weekly throughout the past 2 years. So co-design was seen as really valuable. However, it does require significant resources. So another quote from a coordinator: "If we had spent more time, we could have spent more time going out and engaging with those people, but we didn't really have the time to do that. I think we could have got better results from attendances if we'd done that, really, and we could have made more informed choices." And finally, there was a sense that the activity levels must be right for older adults. So the quote here from one of the focus group sites: "It's not forced on you, you know. If you can't do a certain thing, then just do as much as you can," which is a good thing, rather than having to do something and really feel out of it and be a bit embarrassed. Next slide, please. Another finding that we found from this study was discussions around the perceived benefits and attractions of the sessions. So quite similar to the first study, instructor characteristics were seen as really, really important to the older adults themselves. So again, the same sort of thing, ensuring that they were friendly, approachable and knowledgeable of their needs. One of the quotes from one of the sites: "I think they've been very good because they've actually taught us things and not just left us to it." And again, the social element was really, really important. So one of the quotes here: "It's very important, the social element of the group. If people didn't talk, I probably wouldn't keep on going." So as well as this, the enjoyment of the sessions was seen as key. So a quote here: "So it's like almost unconscious exercise, because you don't think you're exercising because you're just playing." And another perceived benefit from these sessions was the noticeable physical benefits. So one of the quotes from the focus groups: "I've been a lot better joint-wise and everything since, but if I do not go, like if I'm on holiday for 4 or 5 days and that, I do start seizing up a bit then." Next slide. Another theme was around access and activities. So location was really important. So ensuring that the location was local, easy and cheap to travel to. So a couple of quotes here. This is across the road, so I couldn't not really, could I? And a volunteer who was involved in the delivery said to have things that are on offer that are fairly local to them, so it feels, although it might be a bit challenging, it doesn't feel like it's too far out of their comfort zone. Another thing we found was that it seemed that flexibility was really important, as a lot of the people who were attending sessions had many other commitments, caregiving responsibilities. So yeah, one of the focus groups participants said, I do like the fact that I don't have to commit myself every week because there are other things I could be doing as well. So it's helpful to have flexibility, not having to commit every week. So a pay per session seemed to be preferred rather than something like a gym membership. Next slide, please. Another thing that came up in this study was support needs. So this was support needs in terms of the volunteers who were delivering the sessions, as well as support needs that were relating to the experiences of the evaluation. So I'll just start by talking about the experiences of the volunteers who were involved in delivering. So it was really important, there seemed to be a need to ensure that volunteers felt supported and valued. Generally, volunteers were seen as a sustainable way of running these programs, especially when funding is scarce, but it's vital that they are provided a support system and ensuring that they can access this support and feel valued. So a couple of quotes here from volunteers. You need that kind of support, social meetings with other people in the scheme so that A, you don't feel that you're on your own, and B, if there are any issues, regarding perhaps boundaries. And another volunteer said, so if I fall down and break my hip, who's going to do it the next day? It's just you. So we also found that there were support needs in terms of the programme evaluation itself. So from the interviews, it seemed that there was a contradiction in asking people to try new ideas, new ways of working. This need to be able to learn, but at the same time, they were feeling a lot of pressure to recruit particular numbers. And it seemed that this could have an impact on the success of the sessions themselves. So it was difficult sometimes to gain completed questionnaires without negatively impacting the sessions. This is quite time consuming. So further support here would have probably been a bit beneficial. So a couple of quotes here from coordinators. I think it's understanding that the numbers that we do get are still a real success. And another one here, I think the main issue is there's a need to work and allow for the test and learn. And, you know, we accept things are going to go wrong. Not everything's going to work. But then we've sort of been challenging that we need to reach these numbers. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the implications for Activation and future new ways of working. So these new ways of working were generally seen really positively, but the issue is we need to ensure that there are time and resources provided to work in this way. So it takes time to build trust with communities and to get them on board to provide input. And this may be especially difficult in low socioeconomic status areas where there might be more distrust to certain organisations. So this is why working in partnerships with other organisations would be advantageous. So they might have better relationships with and access to certain groups. So yeah, so collaborative and partnership working seems really, really important, as other organisations might have better community links. I think the key thing is that the older person's voice is at the heart of these new approaches. So it's doing with rather than doing to. So the value of their skills and knowledge, so their knowledge about the community in the area, what older people's wants and needs are, it's really, really key to these approaches. Programme leads have learned that older people do not find traditional physical activity messages or language appealing, and that the social element is the key motivator to engage in. And this is by listening closely to their views and opinions, rather than just going out and putting on an activity and assuming that we know best as professionals who might have worked in the physical activity sector for a long time. So yeah, sustainability was a key concern as well. And this needs to be factored in at the planning point of the programme. So here it's also beneficial to get older adults involved, find out what is acceptable to them and come up with inventive ways of sustaining programme after the funding ends. And finally, the evaluation of the programme is really, really important, but certain methods may be more acceptable and feasible.
Okay, so I'll just finish off with the last couple of slides then, which are about the recommendations. So you've heard lots of detail. I think the big picture really is the key thing we're trying to find out at the start of all this is it feasible to use these new ways of working when working with older adults to develop physical activity provision? And I think the short answer is yes, it is feasible. That the people working in various different sectors worked collaboratively together, produced a diverse set of activities that older adults fed into in a meaningful way and engaged with and participated in. So I think we were trying to find out, is this feasible to do this? And I think the short answer is yes, it is feasible to do this. And I think that's particularly important when one bears in mind that Greater Manchester is one of the more deprived parts of the England. And also when there's the kind of ongoing austerity cuts within local authorities who are leading a lot of these programmes. So against a backdrop of things which are pushing against these approaches working, the local authorities, the leisure services people and the charities all working together did manage to get this to work pretty well, I think. It was quite successful. I think the other things to say is that obviously older people, like any group of people, are quite a diverse group. It was interesting to see what a diversity of activities were put on, with obviously some people wanting to take part in some activities, but not in terms of others. So that again suggests that a one size fits all is not what is needed in terms of increasing physical activity. And that's one of the strengths of this approach, is that it did lead to quite a diverse set of activities that different people wanted to get engaged with. And then I think as Amy's set out quite clearly, a lot of people taking part in these activities which increased their physical activity did so because they wanted to take part in social activities that were local to them. They weren't necessarily that interested in physical activity. And so as with a lot of this stuff, it should be marketed in terms of social activities, in terms of what people actually want to do rather than increasing their physical activity. So if you're going to do this, I think there's ways in which it can be done better in future, I think. I think everybody that was involved recognised that the short timescales were quite a challenge, and that if there were longer timescales, then it would be an awful lot easier to do this kind of work. So there were issues with staff turnover, which led to issues such as one particular person engaging a particular group, and then that person leaving, and then that group kind of becoming disengaged. So there were challenges associated with these short timescales. Also, it was quite clear from looking across the 8 different metropolitan borough councils that some of the councils had quite a track record already of working in terms of partnerships with various different organisations. And I think they found this whole process an awful lot easier. Whereas by contrast, some of the metropolitan borough councils had much less experience of doing this kind of thing. I think they found it useful in terms of learning more about how to do this kind of stuff, but going from quite a cold level of doing this kind of thing to developing a programme and having it up and running within 2 years, I think that was quite a challenge for a lot of people. I think if there were longer timescales, it would allow greater inclusion of the groups that were excluded, particularly the ethnic minority groups. And I think a lot of the older adults who volunteered in this kind of work would have benefited from more support, which again requires a bit more resource to do that. The last point, which I think Amy's already covered, is that there is a bit of a contradiction between asking people to do activities because they enjoy them and because they want to talk to other people and they want to have a nice time, and then sticking a questionnaire under their nose as soon as they're coming through the door. So I think there's obviously one needs some sort of evaluation of these sort of programs, but I think maybe greater flexibility of an evaluation approach would be worth thinking about in the future. Okay, great. Thank you very much.
I'm going to pass over to our first case study, which is Angela Martin from Manchester Active, who will take us through her pilot. Thanks, Angela.
Yeah, thanks, Beth. I'll just share my screen. Can everybody see that? Is it working? Okay. Oh, gone right to the very end. Okay. So Manchester. So the Active Ageing pilot was a partnership between Manchester Active, Age Friendly Manchester and Age UK. And we took the insight that we were presented with initially, that Manchester had the highest inactivity levels, both over 55s and over 65s. But along with the learning that existed from age-friendly Manchester programmes, we wanted to develop a way of working together with a focus to increase older people's physical activity levels. So we had two things we wanted to pilot. The first was a place-based offer at Debdale in Gorton to provide an opportunity for individuals who'd struggled to engage in physical activity and to try a range of activities with other older people who were in a similar position. The second area we were keen to develop was around volunteering and specifically physical activity leaders within and across age-friendly Manchester social activities. And what links both areas, you know, apart from targeting old people, is that they've both been developed, shaped by those who participate, deliver and benefit from them. So first of all, the place-based offer at Debdale in Gorton. So we took a place-based approach. Debdale is a very large park situated next to two reservoirs, where in Manchester we have a Debdale Outdoor Centre. It's not far from the district centre, near the market, the shops, situated on quite a busy main road. And we took the outdoor centre as a meeting place. As you can see, it's set in really quite stunning surroundings. It changes as the seasons change. It's really breathtaking. And we wanted to, you know, take this amazing environment and provide an opportunity for older people to engage in the green and blue space there. And we came up with a fitting strapline, which is, it's a place where people will find a brew, a loo, a view, and something to do. So we took a co-design approach. We invited lots of older people along to Debdale, mainly from a range of social activity sessions and groups that we were aware of. Provided lots of taster sessions and generally just, you know, talked to people, had a discussion, generated ideas of what a suitable outdoor activity offer looked like to them. And we kept that dialogue going throughout the last couple of years, and that's really helped us to shape the programme to what it is today. So the volunteer approach was an idea that had been bubbling along for some time, just waiting for the right project to make it happen. We recognised there were lots of social activities and lots of social groups across Manchester, coffee mornings, bingo and cake, etc. And we wanted to find a way of bringing physical activity to those sessions. We were aware that a lot of these activities are coordinated by volunteers who are older people themselves. And actually a lot of these social activities are quite sedentary. So we were able to work with Rosemary Mallis. You can see a picture there. She's a lady with her hands up, just discussing with this group of potential participants who were going to access a training course called Fit for Life training. So Rosemary, a really interesting lady, she, when she retired, became a personal trainer, and she runs an organisation called Over 50s Fitness, and she's really interested in functional fitness. So exercises that keep people mobile, so on a daily basis they can do sort of daily activities. So our aim was to provide 3 training courses across the city, north, central and south. And again, we work with people who are going to access this training really closely. This is one example. We have this sort of session to determine, how would the course run, even down to how many days, hours it would operate, just so the people that were accessing it, it met their needs. So what we wanted to learn from our approach. At Debdale, we wanted to understand if an outdoor activity offer linked to the environment was an attractive offer. Would it increase physical activity levels, particularly for this target audience? We also wanted to understand what opportunities we could provide to be active in the environment, and we wanted to learn whether the co-design approach would be effective. In terms of the volunteer aspect, we wanted to look at whether peer-led delivery of physical activity engaged older adults. and could we create sustainable sessions through peer-led activity, which predominantly would be delivered by volunteers rather than instructor-led activity. And also, you know, the co-design element, working with people who were going to attend the course and how we could deliver that course that best suited their needs. So, successes and challenges. So these are all of the successes, all the pictures you see here today. So being active is an attractive offer, we found. The co-design approach was also really, really valuable. So we were able to organise and test an outdoor activity programme. Initially we provided, I think, a 7-week taster programme in the summer of 2018. It was actually very structured at that point and very instructor-led in terms of the activity. The participants fed back that actually they didn't like this offer. They didn't want instructors telling them what to do. They wanted to sort of turn up on the day, have a brew, and just get involved in something that they felt like getting involved in on the day. So this sort of lent itself to sort of self-led, organised activity, which meant providing some equipment, but allowing the participants to set up and organise the activities themselves. And they actually came up with, you know, a timetable and had really valuable ideas. I think giving people sort of the ownership of the space to create something and generate ideas was really important. The participants at Debdale, they actually call the centre a youth club for older people. That's what they call it. They really use the space creatively. You know, in the winter months, they sort of pack every inch of that building with some kind of activity. And, you know, they've been known to sort of lift a table tennis table and take it outside as well. We started to observe that the participants, they had skills and abilities. Natural leaders started to emerge. So, you know, a couple of people offered to organise a tea fund. A couple of people offered to take people for a walk in the park because they had a lot of local history knowledge about the area. So we started to tap into the strengths and assets of the participants. We also developed an evening offer called a social paddle because we recognised that because the sessions were targeting over 55, some people were still in employment, some people had caring responsibilities during the daytime. So we had a really successful evening social paddle session on the water. We did attract local residents. Many people had lived in the area for many, many years and hadn't actually accessed the green or the blue space. Have to mention Simon Morrissey, who was our coordinator, so we had some dedicated resource 2 days a week, which was really valuable to have that capacity. And also we had 4 older people who joined our steering group. So Elaine, Pauline, Shirley, Maureen, and they really helped to shape the programme as well. There were challenges, so initially recruitment was a challenge. We found word of mouth worked really well. Again, the participants took matters into their own hands. They delivered leaflets, flyers in places that they went to. They also suggested some local banners around the park would be really beneficial, which we did do. And we did actually see an increase in male participation following the banners being put up in the park. And since then we've had a sort of 50-50 split of men and women attending the sessions. I think we had some concerns about an outdoor offer in the winter. Initially we thought this would be a challenge, but actually this is where a number of ideas were generated and things got quite interesting. And I think it was mentioned before, in terms of the ethnicity of participants, it wasn't quite sort of demographically representative of the local area. However, we did start to see this change at the start of this year. So we were confident we were going to sort of start to make some inroads on that. Oh, sorry, just back to the volunteer element in terms of successes and challenges. So one of the successes was Rosemary Mellis, who, you know, the trainer who delivered the course, as you can see on the right-hand side. I think this is the course 2 participants with their certificates. She herself is an older lady, and the feedback from the participants was that was really important to them. And also we were able to recruit a range of older people, and they did deliver to their peers. I think one of the challenges was around recruiting. We aimed to fill the course with 12 people. That didn't happen, but actually the participants on the training courses fed back that helped their learning. They preferred to be in a much smaller group. And then keeping track of volunteers once they were out, sort of delivering some of the sessions. It was hard to keep track of them. They're very busy people, they're active and busy. And another challenge we had was around them completing the monitoring and evaluation forms. They weren't so keen to sort of handle personal information and data. And that was understandable because, you know, they were delivering social groups and they were friendly with some of the participants themselves. So last slide from me, in terms of future approach. So collaboration with partners was really important, particularly with the age-friendly networks and tapping into those networks. The place-based approach allowed us to really focus on an area and the community and work with them to find solutions to engage older inactive adults. I think the social aspect, as you can see here, you know, that cup of tea, that brew when you arrive, is really important to a lot of people. Some people would just come up, would walk to the centre and have a cup of tea and not plan to get involved in any other activity. But you would see them engage, you would see them, you know, get hooked into taking part in a small group activity. But I think it's important to realise that people do need to feel comfortable in their surroundings with the people in those surroundings. And I think scalability as well, for us, this is an important point. You know, it's fantastic to have that amazing environment at Debdale, but at a really basic level, this is a kitchen, a room and some outdoor space, and it can be applied to other areas. So we did actually take this model over to Newton Heath, to the Stirling Centre, which is a very, very different area. And indeed, we found we were working with probably an age group who was 70 plus versus the age group at Debdale who was sort of 55 plus. But we did see the same kind of model applied and has been successful as well. Particularly there's an issue with social isolation in older people, and they have a lunch offer as well. So there's that hook of a meal as well for people. But it's been equally successful over in Newton Heath as well for us. And that's the end of my presentation. Thank you. I've left my email address there if anybody wants to get in touch afterwards. Thanks, Beth.
Brilliant, perfect. Thanks, Angela. That was great, and I can definitely vouch for its success. I was lucky enough to attend Debdale a couple of times and hear the voices of older people, and it was a perfect, brilliant pilot, which I think will continue to grow from strength to strength. So thanks for showcasing that. We're now going to move on to Ross McGuigan from Life Leisure Stockport and Gareth Ball from Age UK, who are going to take us through the Stockport pilot. Thanks, guys. I'm just going to share the screen for them. Hopefully this will work. Just let me know when you want me to move on, guys.
Thanks, Beth. That's perfect. Thank you. Yes, good morning. My name is Ross McGuigan. I work for Life Leisure. I was a project lead on behalf of Life Leisure, and Gareth will be doing the second half of the presentation. Gareth worked as a project lead for Age UK Stockport, but he actually has now half of his time with Life Leisure, which is a great success for us. If you can just move on to the next slide, please. So we're just going to go through a quick sort of presentation around delivery of the Active Ageing programme. First of all, the programme itself, the premise around it was to provide a minimum of 12 weeks per mental support for adults 55 and above, to support them with different activities across the borough. So this kind of included sort of the beginning for either a referral from a local service or a self-referral option into the programme. Just an overview of the actual of Active Ageing in Stockport is it was a partnership made up of Life Leisure, Age UK, Stockport Council and Stockport Homes Group. This was really positive from the beginning to allow that sort of collaborative approach into using and sharing kind of resources and expertise from each organisation to make sure that the actual delivery of the programme was as success as it was. Into just tiny little bits around the programme itself. The peer mental support was made up of local volunteers coordinated by Age UK Stockport, and one of the premise behind this was just to make sure that it was adults who feel their experience is relatable to the participants. So they were key in order to build up the relationships with the people, the participants, to access some of the activities that were on offer. The free activity passes and the inclusive activity timetable were the resource available to the participants. And one of the things we found from the beginning is that we have a strong sort of offer of different activities, over 100 different activities across Stockport. And we felt that in addition to some extra ones that were delivered through Stockport Homes, we felt that our service and our combined delivery programs and initiatives, such as a social sport and activity program called I Wish I Tried, and a chair-based and low-impact exercise called Smile, and a swimming offer, they all had very similar outcomes in terms of that they offered a very beneficial social side to what we could deliver within the area. So to use obviously the pay mentor support and the free activity passes was something really beneficial for everyone who joined through the programme. And just the last sort of two things around the overview were the ongoing support and advice. For older adults, we want to make sure there was just a simple kind of contact communication pathway into Age UK Stockport and through Life Leisure in particular. So there was, the telephone number available, but we also were able to speak to people through the referral process that was set up, which were very sort of flexible and adaptable, dependent on the organisation who would refer through. And finally, the marketing campaign and strategy was a huge aspect of this programme, and something we'll touch on in this presentation. But the combined marketing resource through these four organisations really helped us to grow and share the message further through the different localities. Next slide, please. Thanks. So one of the main things around what we wanted to learn was there's a few listed here, and I'll just sort of explore, is that the new ways of working and outreach were really important for us. To build on some of the assets that we already had was key towards not sort of maybe doing some of the same kind of same things that have been delivered previously. We were conscious that we wanted to make sure that we could build on what was already out there. One of the key developments was a change in direction at Age UK Stockport with their befriending service, as they now offer a walk and talk service that sees the volunteers accompany older adults on walks around their local communities. So kind of pre-COVID, that was particularly developed through Gareth within the service, and it allowed for a very conversational sort of time with each individual to allow for honesty, from the people, and also that building of trust and relationship to then link into some of the activities that were on offer. And that's just one example, of one of the different ways in which we wanted to explore how it would work. But we wanted to make sure that we kind of expanded and not just offer like the sort of walk and talk, but this was just dependent on the ways that people were referred through to our peer mentors as well. The partnerships with other local organisations were very important. Obviously, the four sort of key organisations delivering this, we feel that are very sort of recognisable, and it allowed us to bring our sort of strengths together to spread the message even further. So these kind of working relationships were built and already strong sort of beforehand, but we're able to take this approach again to make sure it's the most effective way of delivering it. One example of that was we came together to speak to pharmacies, and we allowed for our Active Ageing Stockport toolkit to be sent electronically and to be posted through all the healthy pharmacies in Stockport. And again, they would distribute the messages quite differently, just dependent on their locality. But it allowed us just to make sure that we could try and reach, particularly older adults who are socially isolated, and find different ways to access information. And an additional sort of partnership there was that through this program. We're now working with the adult social care who integrated the program into their place-based working, which was a real positive for us. Just to touch on around learning and engagement, we found that we could identify places within localities so people could access physical activity opportunities to allow us to signpost effectively. And again, that was just added by the skills of the peer mentors that were able to kind of share that message a lot differently to maybe how sometimes, you know, we would share that message through some of the assets that we have. So that one-to-one support was very important for people. The learning around significant life events, again, was something we found quite niche with this peer support. And the volunteers, we did recruit through sort of the same criteria as what was set for active ageing. So it was really important for them to share their personal experiences with them as well. And just one of the last things really was not just how simple a promotion is is an aspect to spreading the message, but the importance of the face of the campaign. And the last slide will show the faces that we had in order to be people who are relatable and to share something that was inspirational from their experience that has happened. And we've got a few videos to share with you at some after kind of this presentation, so we'll be able to show that. I'm now going to pass you through to Gareth, who's going to share the successes and challenges of the programme.
Thanks, Beth, and thanks, Ross. Oh, yeah, there we are. They're on the right slide. So yeah, everyone, my name's Gareth and I'm from Age UK Stockport. I think one of the big successes of this programme, just sort of echoing on from what Ross said, was the partnership working involved. So we had obviously our leisure experts from, you know, the council and Life Leisure respectively. But then we also had an older person's charity and ourselves, which really sort of strengthened the programme, and then Stockport Homes with the sort of outreach in terms of people we could reach the programme to. I'm going to we were developing lots of work streams, but just for today, we're going to sort of focus on the actual intervention, which is the one-to-one peer support, which the volunteers that came through Age UK Stockport gave. So how it worked is that Age UK Stockport recruited peer mentors to support older adults to become more physically active. Now, one of the first challenges we came across was that people need obviously different levels of support, and in order to provide different levels of support, you need a good volunteer base. So in terms of who we supported, there was sort of 3 categories. So there were your quick wins, which were giving out information to people and people independently then taking that information and attending an activity group. You had your sort of mid-term support, so that might be anywhere from, you know, a couple of weeks to 6 weeks. And then more long-term support was where someone needed volunteer support past 6 weeks for the full duration, up to 12 weeks. And there were a few that had support beyond that. The support really came through older adults, the volunteers themselves, just accompanying people, building confidence. It might initially start out by taking someone on a walk, walking around the local walking route and just having, you know, conversations around whatever that may be. And then from there, it may have developed into actually signposting someone into one of the organised sessions. You know, you can take chair-based exercise, Tai Chi, walking groups. There's a really good range of offer in Stockport. I think from our perspective at Age UK, what we really liked about the programme is that it actually changed the organisation's perspective on physical activity. So previously, exercise has been on the agenda, but maybe not always at the front. And it's actually tailored other areas of our programmes now to actually incorporate exercise more. So an example that Ross did touch on earlier was now we've sort of adapted our traditional befriending model, and it's now been split into 2 segments. So we have our social engagement, which you could say is the traditional, where a volunteer goes and sits in someone's house and offers them some companionship. But we've also got our walk and talk model, which is where a volunteer now will actually take someone out and they might walk around the local neighbourhood. They might go a little bit further afield and go on a bigger walk, or they might just walk in their garden with them if mobility issues are a problem. So yeah, from our perspective, we're really, really happy with that. In terms of challenges, the sustainability of the actual volunteer admin. So it requires someone to coordinate the volunteers, which is obviously staff time, and post funding that became an issue. That has been dealt with slightly in the sense that current workloads of other members of staff, they're able to pick up the walk and talk volunteers and just coordinate them. But in terms of expansion, there may be issues if there's not further funding. And then, yeah, so administration requirements from individuals was mainly around the research questionnaire, getting that filled in properly at baseline, 3 months, 6 months, and a couple at 12 months was a challenge because some people didn't always want to take part in that aspect. Next slide, please, Beth. So yeah, our approach to the future, I guess we're really happy with the fact that Active Aging is now actually embedded in the active community strategy, which is being developed by SMBC. So actually having a real focus on that issue is really great. In terms of our pathway, we've now set up a referral pathway whereby people can just ring up Age UK Stockport, and people within the organisation will be able to give advice in terms of where people can find relevant exercise opportunities. The partnerships have been sustained, which is really great. And in terms of post-COVID world, that's been a massive challenge. More recently, we've had a bit of good news because we managed to get some of our older persons' activities online. But again, that's a big issue because there's the whole digital literacy aspect. A project we're actually working on at the moment is with Sky, and their staff are supporting some of the individuals we work with to actually use digital devices. They donated 15 tablets to us, and I guess one of the big strengths from this program is we've actually managed to sort of incorporate some form of exercise into that package. So whilst they're learning how to use these devices, they're going to be shown how to get onto YouTube, and some of our pre-recorded sessions are on YouTube, and with a long-term view that they'll be able to take part in some of our weekly online sessions. So currently we have chair-based exercise online, and we also have an over 50s Keep Fit class. So, hopefully COVID's not around for too much longer and there's a vaccine on the way, but we're sort of set up a bit better than we previously were for that. And yeah, I think that's us, Beth.
Did you just want to touch quickly on the phases of the campaign? Because I'll share the link. Yeah, do you just want to?
And just the last slide just shows these were kind of the 4 sort of groups of the people who were the faces of our campaign from the beginning, and all have varying sort of significant life effects, events that it kind of affected them, and their lifestyle. The videos are around sort of 2 to 3 minutes long of each person. And we also had a sort of general one that just gives a bit of an overview of Active Aging in Stockport, but especially Fred and Robert, fantastic characters. And we are looking to be doing a little bit more with actually these, the kind of campaign faces during their sort of times through COVID as well. So we're hoping to develop something over the next couple of months just to kind of a bit of an update to share their experience, and how it's affected them and things. So be more than happy to share the links with you as well.
Perfect, thanks guys. again, another wonderful case study, really bringing to life what we've seen through the evaluation. And I think one thing that stands out for me is definitely the impact of connecting with specific charities connected to older people, and that how much that adds value to the overall programme. Apologies, I know we're 4 minutes over. I'm going to quickly fly through my final slides in record time, I'm hoping, because I'm conscious that, you know, everyone wants a dinner and they don't want to stay on with me forever. So bear with me 1 second. Oh, just want to play ball. Let's try again. Can everyone see that? Yeah. Oh. Okay, so in terms of, I just wanted to touch on the sort of future direction and where the programme is taking us, but also some other areas that we're starting to work on in terms of priorities for GM and in line with the age-friendly vision. So this was just to touch on the fact that my role previously within Greater Sport has been very much delivery of the programme and heavily involved in making sure we achieved our KPIs and bring his partners on the journey with us. And we're moving more into a more strategic influencing role. So how can we take these learnings, embed them across the system, but also touch on other areas as well as sort of community-based physical activity, but also work on else can we add value that we do know are some of them are most inactive cohorts. So I'm just going to do a whistle-stop tour even, I'll try that again, of some of the key priorities that we have agreed with partners and has been endorsed by the Ageing Hub in terms of our future direction for the next 12 months. So firstly, we obviously continuing to link to the GM age-friendly strategy and aware that this is adapted slightly in terms of the COVID response. So heavily focused on tackling inequalities, economic recovery, social recovery, and particularly heavily on digital inclusion. And we know that there's been a lot of exclusion throughout the pandemic, and how do we support that through physical activity. Our second priority, which has paused slightly due to the impact of COVID, but is a partnership with GMCA and the delivery of an Ageing in Place programme, which has been based on identifying particular wards within localities that have adopted age-friendly principles already, and how do we build on that and connect that to public service reform and showcase some examples of best practice. So hopefully we'll be able to, in the future, take the learnings from this programme, the principles, and adopt that in some of the way forward. Thirdly, we've got the continuation of comms and the narrative of ageing, so tackling ageism through physical activity, so that be particularly around the imagery we use of portraying older people who are active, and the language that we use around physical activity and how particularly in Greater Manchester people are valuable, not vulnerable. So we continue to support that. Fourth, we've got, again, integrations of the learnings from this programme. So how can we bring our partners that we've worked with on the journey with us, particularly for a number of localities who tested approaches within specific wards of a locality. How can we start to test what works wider across that locality and start to integrate some of this into other programmes as well. Fifth, we've started some work in terms of influence the GM Health and Social Care Partnership and sort of adult social care agenda. And this has been around development of an adult social care and physical activity working group, predominantly focusing on health and social care partnership, working with some of our colleagues at the University of Manchester who've been able to showcase some really brilliant evidence-based programmes. And how can we start to integrate those across key systems such as the Live and Well home, care home settings, and adopt some of these principles across other settings. We've also had conversations around how can we start to influence the quality commissioning standards, which is sort of the equivalent to Ofsted for a care setting, and add physical activity as a measure to start to entice care homes and look at how we can start to integrate physical activity and strength and balance within their daily offer for older residents. Six, we've got active travel and over 50s. So this is sort of accelerated due to COVID, and we've seen that older people started to engage more in walking and cycling as we saw the roads start to reducing cars and the safety issue around that. So how could we start to build on some of that? So we pulled together a working steering group of both national and GM partners, again including academics, to support some of this, to work with Transport for Greater Manchester on how we look at policies through an ageing lens, to start to unpick some of that, and then hopefully pull out how we can tackle some of those barriers to engaging. And then finally, we've got the falls prevention agenda for Greater Manchester. So we do know that there is a bit of a disconnect between community-based provision in terms of physical activity pathways and exercise referrals to clinical pathways. And we have identified that there are numbers of localities which have got this working really well and redesigned pathways. And I guess what we're trying to do is map that across the system from a GM lens and look at how we can support other localities to bring them on that journey and consequently reduce falls, hopefully. Again, working with health and social care, NHS, our local leisure providers, AGKs who commission falls prevention, and a number of partners as we go. So that, in a nutshell, is what we're trying to do over the next 12 months. Again, not on my own, with a range of partners on this call and other organisations. And that just sort of leads me into the final slide of today, which is looking at quick identifying just the key programme reports and signposting you to those. So the web page on the bottom of the slide, you'll be able to download the full academic report, which David and Amy kind of took us through the headlines previously, and the appendices is also there for real rich information in terms of each individual pilot, as there was 8 pilots across the programme. So I would definitely recommend people to have a look at that. We've also pulled together sort of a learning report, which has just pulled out a condensed summary of the key headlines, both quantitative and qualitative, and highlighted some of the key recommendations that we'd advise people to take forward. My email and contact number are on the slide, so please do get in contact if there's any ways that you want to connect in terms of our future direction, but also any questions on the programme in general, or wanting to connect with key localities. I'm more than happy to signpost you as we go. And finally, I just want to say a massive thanks to everyone for taking your time today. I know we've gone 12 minutes over, so apologies for that. And apologies for the technology difficulties we had at the beginning. But as we know, these things happen on Zoom. Massive thanks to all the speakers today. Your presentations were brilliant, and you've really showcased in 2 hours what we did over a 2-year programme, which was perfect. And again, thanks to our facilitators for capturing notes and supporting me with today. And just want to say have a great day, and do get in contact if you want to follow up on anything. Thank you.